So, we talked about briefly that, design is all about sort of knowing where you're going. That was the Alice in Wonderland quote, which is one of my favorites as well. And so it's important that, before you get down into the depth of really designing and understanding the how, you want to start with really understanding the business requirements. And so one of the slides that you'll eventually see is really highlighting sort of, the pyramid of requirements that you think about in a design phase, right? Starting with business requirements at the very highest level, and then those generally, you start getting more and more detailed, you get into more user and functional requirements, then you get into, technical and system requirements. The important thing when we start off is to keep it at a high level and really focus on the business stakeholder that is the charter who is ultimately responsible and accountable for this project being successful, and really work with them initially to understand the highest level business requirements that they are going to deliver against, right? And excuse me, so many times I think you sort of, in the speed to get going, you oftentimes drop down into a lower level of technical, product or system requirements, and it's so important. And the business use case, which is that first stage, is really about staying at the higher level, really focusing on the business process. This is an important part of articulating what the solution should do, breaking that process down into use cases, really articulating some of the differences between maybe different instances of those processes. We talked about it a bit earlier this morning about how you may have different regions, different departments, different business units that may have variations of process. So don't just understand the business requirements from a single global process, but in most cases there are variations that you need to understand. And then ultimately, what are the success criteria? When you've enabled these changes to the business process, you've delivered on a set of outcomes. What does that deliver, right? And that, again, should be articulated by the business stakeholder and really articulated in terms of what they are looking for, as an outcome to the project.
Business use case. So this is the first stage of the design, and you're going to see it on a slide shortly. The biggest challenges that we always face at the business use case phase is that the business is coming to us, and when I say to us, as no-coders, right? If I'm a no-coder, and telling us, I need this section, I need this field, and I need this particular formula or this particular logic or this particular workflow. This is not what we're doing at the business use case stage. Absolutely not. At the business use case stage, we're coming and saying, here is the business process that we need to automate, right? Here is the logic on the business level that we need to automate. And no-coders and no-code architects are the people who actually define how exactly we're going to do that. And it might be a new section, or it might be just a new lookup, or it might be just a new workflow or DCM, dynamic case management. It might be very different approach to automating the particular use case that the business needs to automate. But again, what I encourage you to think about during this first stage of the business use case, please think about business rather than thinking about the software. So that's kind of the biggest challenge that we always see during the business use case, right?
That's correct, Catherine. And I think, we have in the deck, if we have time, some examples of what is a good example of a really business articulated use case and what's more of a technical or functional, type of requirement. The other thing I would add to this is you want to think broadly, right? And so don't scope yourself down to just thinking about that first release yet. You'll ultimately will get to trying to scope things down into that MVP, but initially you want to think broadly because your business process, change, whatever it is, may take several steps along the journey. And so you start by thinking broadly, and that allows you, again, to not be too constrained or too limited in some of your thinking.
Okay, and the final thought here, and we will move further from the business use case, the final thought here is consistency along the whole organization or just automation of a particular use case. That's what you remember at the keynote. We had a conversation with Vita Quinol because, and I tried to uncover this topic because that's a very, very hard topic actually. They have 12 different offices. So how do they want their sales process to be run, to be managed? Do they want to have exactly the same process automated in each of those 12 offices? Or do they want to have their own separate business processes in each of those 12 locations? That's a hard question. And I can tell you from our experience, we've seen everything. We've seen organizations who would tell us, okay, we want exactly the same process everywhere in the world, China, Japan, US, France, everywhere the same, and completely opposite. Automate whatever they need and just let them do their work. So it might be very, very different. So this business use case, just to summarize, stage number 1, business use case, talk to business and define what exactly needs to be automated, but not how it's going to be automated. It's only what needs to be automated, right? So that was stage number 1. Stage number 2.
Stage number 2, you start to move into options analysis, which is where you start to get into the how, right? And at a top level, and Katherine had a great slide earlier in her keynote, which she showed a 2x2 matrix of sort of the classic buy versus build choices. No code really introduces a third option, right? And it's really the best of both worlds in a lot of cases because it gives you, the speed of sort of traditional package software, right? You don't take a lengthy amount of time to implement from scratch, but you can still have it your way and you can customize and configure it. So when we think about the options analysis, there's really...
And before we unlock it, maybe we should ask the audience. Let's brainstorm together. So when the business comes to you and say, okay, so these are the business use case, what are my options here? What are the options? Let's brainstorm together. Let's do some work together. What are the options? Except Creatio, of course. Creatio is option number 1. That's obvious. Outside of Creatio, seriously, but I'm serious. Outside of Creatio, what are the options? Not in terms of the brands, but in terms of the types of the software that you're going to use. Huh? Coding. Thank you, Oren. Custom development. So these options still exist, right? Custom development from scratch, put in the lines of code, building the custom app from scratch. This is option number 1. What would be another option? White labeling. Could you unlock it? Could you uncover it, please?
Sure. So 90% of the platform is built for a specific use case. You come in and put your label on and use it, the last 10%. So not a ton of customization from a functional standpoint, but more so from a branding standpoint. So if you have a very specific use case, say your business wants to create a marketplace for people to connect with each other, you use a white label tool like Shared Tribe instead of building it from scratch.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you very much for that. Beside this one, what are the other options that you use in your organizations to automate workflows?
Excel.
Thank you very much. We can just use packaged apps. What's the limitation of Excel? But actually, Excel in some cases is a good one. What's the limitation of the Excel? Will you brainstorm with me?
From a business perspective, it's like unlimited. And there's so many creative things done in Excel for you guys.
Okay, sounds good. So we have a white labeling, we have custom development, we have packaged applications. Burley.
And then there's no code.
And here comes no code
with
already built apps on it, right?
Correct, yeah, and there's actually a range. You may use no code as a platform and build everything from the no code platform up. You may use a pre-built application that's already built on the no code platform. You may go out to the marketplace and use some of the composability techniques that Andy was talking about to mix and match. Some components may be pre-built, other components you may configure. So there's a range inside that. And so there's a lot of choices. We understand that that you need a lot of cases to provide some guidance or some framework to teams as they are making those choices. So part of the second stage is actually a decision framework that will provide that helps you make those decisions, right, and gives you some guidance on sort of when to use what. In particular, I'll start with the choice on using packaged software. it can be a very good fit, but I think it's for those cases where you've got a pretty, well-defined and perhaps narrow use case, right? Where you're buying an accounting system, right? And you know that it provides a pre-built set of functions. It may already provide support for certain industry standards, and so there are many cases where the pre-built packaged software makes the most sense rather than trying to rebuild one of those yourself. But for a lot of processes in your business, they may be more customized. And it may require actually the configurability and sort of the freedom to customize that a no-code platform can provide. And so really the second option for those scenarios is to look at a continuum of using the no-code platform plus perhaps pre-built templates or pre-built applications. And so that really gives you, I think, the flexibility to choose or configure your process. Once you've chosen that, then there's always going to be cases where you may have certain components or certain parts of the solution that are very technically demanding, right? They require either very specific, capabilities from a scale. They may require very technically demanding integration. And so there's going to be a role for custom development. And you can add custom development into, again, the no-code sort of architecture. This is one of the benefits of composability. It's not an all or nothing. This is not a monolithic system where you have to choose one of the boxes, but in fact, you can add in features, third-party components, you can add in custom development on top of the no-code platform, and then create a composable or component-based approach to the architecture.
Brilliant, brilliant. So here we have all 12 stages, ladies and gentlemen. So we're at the design stage right now, and we have 4 sub-stages. We just discussed business use case and unlocked the options analysis. Let's move to the third one, design and prototyping. And let me ask you this question. Let's imagine you need to automate a loan origination process, which consists of multiple different sub-processes, right? So entering the application, then scoring, then decision-making. Question to you. Design and prototyping stage, what would be your strategy? Would you try to put the whole workflow for loan management into the no-code platform, or will you take a part of it, a piece of it, and try to prototype it? What's the strategy here? Okay, Oren says MVP. Any other opinions?
Process by process.
We'll take it slow. We'll take it process by okay, good.
We need to digest what we do.
Thank you. Any other ideas? Throw me the ideas.
Yeah, start small and
Go small.
yeah, start small.
Brilliant.
Identify what you want to accomplish, and then build towards that.
Thank you for that, Bill.
I would go back to the first step, lay the whole thing out, and then go piece by piece.
Thank you very much. And this is exactly what Burley and I recommend. Lay the whole thing out, try to draw the whole process using the no-code tools, and then go piece by piece. So let's go into the details of the design and prototyping. Burley.
Yeah, so it does sound counterintuitive. And again, I think it's because we're all trained to want to get into the building as quickly as possible. But in this stage, you do want to think as broadly as possible, because the key objective for this is actually to test the vision, to test alignment with the business and make sure that you have that correct, right? If you start diving deep into implementing a particular, part of the application, you've missed the opportunity to really ensure that, that your stakeholder and everyone is aligned around the vision perspective. This is one of the powerful things about no code as well, is that you can prototype inside the tools, right? We're not talking, paper and pencil or throwaway wireframes. You're actually prototyping inside the actual tools. And so one of the real benefits about this is you get much better feedback from the end users, right? Because the end users will see something and it looks like a real application. And so it brings out better feedback because you're using the tools. It also can be done much more rapidly. You haven't had to write a bunch of sort of plumbing code just to sort of get the application working, right? So you can very quickly go broad. It doesn't mean that you have built in every validation rule, or you don't have every error step of the business process. You haven't perhaps gotten every interface. In fact, you may stub a lot of interfaces, right, just for the sake of showing the broad end-to-end vision. But again, focus on the prototyping side and getting something very quickly that you can innovate, you can ideate with your stakeholder and get alignment around what's meeting their vision. The other thing that's really powerful here, and I've seen this quite a number of times, is it removes sort of the barrier to failure, right? In some ways, because you can test things, get feedback quickly, and move on. You haven't wasted a bunch of effort going deep and building something yet. And so you get much better ideas, and it spurs ideation and innovation with the stakeholder at a very early stage in the life cycle, which is where you want to get that collaboration going. Once you are aligned and once you've tested the vision, then in later stages we'll start going deeper into the design. We'll scope it for MVP. But at this point, you want to stay broad in terms of the prototyping exercise.
Brilliant, brilliant. And just to summarize why we strongly believe that we need to go broad at this stage. Because one of the questions is options analysis. Have we selected the software correctly? Do we need any other add-ons? Do we need any components that we need to add to our meal, right? Just to make sure that it's going to fly all together, right? So all we recommend to do at this stage, follow the happy path. Take the happy path and just try to build the whole application at this stage using the no-code tools without going into the details, period. Just don't go into the details, but see the overall picture. That's all about design and prototyping. And you can easily do that with the no-code tools, right? And again, I'm not advertising Creatio. There are some other tools out there, but that's the whole idea. You build the data model, you build the workflows, you build the sections, you build, take into account the UX and UI, and here we go. So we can see how the future application is gonna look like. Project assignment. So question to you. What do you believe are the most important steps at the project assignment stage? So when we have this beautiful prototype already, we have it, right? So we have the prototype. What goes next? Any ideas? Oh, and I forgot about the stickers. Eric, you must have given me those stickers. And now I understand why no one wants to answer my questions.
She's not giving out stickers.
Please bring me more stickers. We need those freedom stickers. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, what would be the next step? Please. Brilliant. Can you elaborate more? What is?
That workflow that you've identified and really diving in what's going to be the first thing that you're going to do.
Thank you very much. I'm with you 100%. Prioritization and putting the whole backlog together. What else? What are the other steps we need to do here? Please.
Because we went so broad, you can maybe check if you've missed anything to bring everything together, and if it's easy to bring everything together. So getting a better view or vision of what you're trying to achieve.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for that. Any other ideas? What else we need to do? Please. This lady here and this gentleman here. Everyone wants stickers. Everyone wants to fly the helicopter. Eric.
I'm all over it.
I say define the pilot team to improve.
Thank you very much. Define which exactly is going to be the group of people that. So are you talking about the group of people that will be using the software, or are you talking about the group of people that will be building the software?
In fact, both, because we should have the two kind of user and administrator for the future. So it's a team, the foundation of the solution.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you. Appreciate it. Anything else we need to do at this stage? Any other ideas? Please, Oren.
At this stage, I asked the customer to appoint their own leadership.
Question to you. What about the business use case? Do you want to see leadership from your client already at the business use case stage? stakeholder, right? A stakeholder, someone who will have the final word about the application.
Committee with stakeholders.
Okay, brilliant, brilliant. And Burley, I'll give a word to you right now, but from my standpoint, the most important and the most complex part of the project assignment is to make the decision. Okay, we have this broad prototype, and exactly as, excuse me, I don't know you, Megan said, so what's going to go into the MVP? Which features and which functions we're going to prioritize to go to the MVP stage and to deliver the result ASAP. That's the key job at the project assignment stage. Burley.
Yeah. So the feedback and discussion, I think, was all spot on with a lot of the things that are critical here. This is all about decomposing it down into smaller use cases. But the trick is, to Katherine's point, you can carve off maybe a technical subset that ultimately, that could be an achievable MVP, but not deliver on the business value or delight the users, right? So it's a balancing act, and while you want to scope things down to make things more manageable, it also has to deliver ultimately against the business value expectations and the outcomes that the business stakeholder has set. So it's somewhat of an art. We'll give some tips and guidance on how to help with that, but it still is a balancing act. And the key is, though, as you start to hone in and scope, sometimes it's driven by business priorities, sometimes it's driven by timeline. It's multidimensional, right? You may have to deliver by a certain timeline because there's, a competitive product and market that you're trying to compete against, or there may be tied to other changes in the business and the process that you have to support. So scoping it down to MVP, aligning around the timeline, excuse me, that is important to do up front. At this point then, there's a range of delivery models. Excuse me.
It's okay. And in terms of the delivery models, we're going to be talking the application matrix, and probably we should go to it right now and dive deep into the application matrix for you to clearly understand when we say different delivery models, what exactly we do. Do you mind if we go to the application matrix right now?
I think it was a couple slides.
Yeah, it was earlier.
Yeah.
Okay, let me go up. Here we go.
One more.
Here it is. Yeah, here it is. Wonderful. So that's the application matrix, and let's dive deep into it just to understand what is delivery, what are the options for the delivery models here.
So we think about 3 dimensions to the matrix: business, governance, and technical. So we'll talk about each of these sort of one by one, and then we'll talk about how this all comes together. And excuse me, how you use this.
So we will start with the business complexity, okay? So business complexity, that's all about the consistency of the workflow across all the different regions, across all the departments that are going to be using it. It's all about different languages because, again, we need to take it into the consideration what is the core language for your database. It's all about cross-departmental usage of the application. I will give you a very practical example from our company, for example. We have a large sales department as well as the channels department. And the requirements that the channels department has to all the different parts of the application could be actually quite controversial to the sales department. So thinking about what are the fields that need to be added, what are the workflows and how they interact one with each other between the sales and channels department, that's a science. It needs to be taken into the consideration. But again, depending on how complex the business case is, we're going to either do it using the no-coders within the business unit. For example, our channels business unit, they have their own no-coders, or we're going to engage our center of excellence. Burley.
Yeah, and obviously you may not yet have a COE in place, but this sort of shows in more of a steady state operation where as you start using no-code more broadly across the organization and as you have formalized those practices into a COE, that the COE plays a vital role in terms of spotting and mediating some of those conflicts. that Katherine talked about. The other thing is around looking for opportunities for reuse, right? That's one of the things we've talked about a bit in terms of composability, looking for opportunities. That's another important role they play. They will spot perhaps similarities around the process or similarities around business functions or business components that they may be able to leverage and reuse across other parts of the organization. So you'll decide based on sort of a simple, medium, advanced sort of criteria, and we're going to be providing sort of supporting checklists and suggested examples of how to sort of score each of these criterion that you see along the left to help make decisions. Now, obviously, this is a starting point. You'll add your own, extended criteria as you tailor it for your business. But this gives you an example of how you can sort of assess the business complexity and use that as one of the 3 inputs.
Brilliant. And let me give you another example here. We have item number 2, which is business critical use case. For example, I gave you this example of the loan origination use case, right? Which is definitely a business critical use case for a bank. If they make a mistake in this workflow, probably they're going to have significant financial losses, right? So depending on the criticality of the use case, we're going to make the decision who exactly will be implementing it. Do we need to engage the Center of Excellence, or just the business users, the no-coders from our business department can do the job here? Okay?
And it's important to note, again, just because something is business critical does not mean that it should be custom developed. Right, we talked about the myth, right, that, no code only for simple apps. No code can handle business critical applications, but the key is the people involved, some of your developers, your architects. You may want someone that has, is more seasoned, has more experience in using the platform, and so turning to the COE, getting their assistance can help ensure that you're thinking through carefully all of the sort of ramifications as you start building out your workflow, as you start building out your application.
And let us pause here, because this is such an important topic to understand. If you need to engage the COE, or if you better develop it using the business resources within your business unit, let me pause here in case you have any questions or comments here. Any questions on this part? Business complexity. We're good? Good? Okay, let's move to the next one, governance complexity. And before we move to the next one, let me ask you the question, because we do have more stickers here. Do you have more stickers? Okay, we do have more stickers. So I was given the task to distribute all the stickers we have, so please help me with that. So question to you, governance complexity. What type of governance regulations could it be potentially in your organization? Give me some examples. When we say governance, what exactly we mean, ladies and gentlemen? Data protection, thank you very much. Example number 1.
Roles and permissioning.
Thank you, brilliant. Roles and permissioning, access rights, brilliant. Anything else? What else we cover with the umbrella called governance? Huh? You need to help me understand what exactly you mean under enterprise architecture here.
Governing, not only like going to implement something, then from the architecture perspective, we need to understand where does it sit, in the whole ecosystem, right? And there needs to be someone who's like governing, where the particular piece, sits.
This part would probably go in our methodology into the technical complexity, to the 3rd layer, if you don't mind, okay? Let's talk a little bit more about governance. What are the... Thank you very much. Compliance. What kind of compliance? Just give me some examples.
Security regulations, business regulations.
Perfect. Security regulations. What about the external compliance? Please. Huh? Okay. Thank you very much for that. Anything else?
Financial real government regulations that you have to follow.
Financial government regulations. Absolutely. We need to follow them. Thank you for that. Eric. Yep. Over here. You can't miss a single person. Seriously. This is very serious. Okay? Okay. Anything else?
Data transparency.
Data transparency, brilliant, perfect. Can you share with me some external compliance regulations that we all know and that comes to your mind when we say government regulations or even the whole continent regulation? Thank you, GDPR it is, GDPR it is. That's a great example. We have simultaneously 2 people here, okay? So that's one. Anything else? HIPAA compliance. Brilliant, exactly. That's what we have here, HIPAA, we have GDPR. So, like, I feel like we're surrounded with all different compliances here. But, yeah, but we need to follow them. And again, I'm not trying to dramatize, but if we're talking about a bank, there are many compliance regulations that we need to follow, right, to protect our clients, to be on a safe side. So we need to follow those governance regulations. Burley, let's talk about how exactly we're going to do that.
So there's a whole laundry list, as you've identified, of both internal and external governance considerations that you need to apply. Keep in mind, where we are in the life cycle is we're still at the project assignment. So at this stage, we're not actually going to audit or enforce any of these governance checks yet. But what is super important is to understand which ones apply, right? Before we get going, understand at least which are the ones that will apply and some of the considerations that we should know before we actually start going into the design and build of components, right? That'll make it a lot easier than finding out when you're at the tail end of the project that, oh, I should have considered X, Y, and Z. So it's really starting up front with identifying those that are applicable and relevant. It also helps you identify who, again, should be involved, right? If you have something that has very simple, access rights, if it has very simple security requirements, if it has maybe no external regulations, then it may tilt you towards the business team is equipped with their own resources to deliver by themselves, right? Because it's well defined, it's low complexity from a governance standpoint. The further you get in terms of rating and sort of scoring each of these criteria, then the more that we advise you engaging the COE. Because the COE, again, will have seen multiple applications that probably have gone through this process before. They will have a broader depth of sort of experience and practices built out for your specific regulations or your specific compliance requirements. And so the COE, again, takes a heavier lift as you get to the right into the medium and advanced levels, right? So again, all we're trying to do right now is identify which ones are going to be important, help identify which delivery model makes the most sense, and that helps you, understand the second dimension, which is the governance complexity. We'll get to then the final one around technical.
Let's do it. Let's get to it. That technical complexity, and that's actually to your point about the architecture. So technical complexity, integrations. That's what we see in each and every project. We do have projects with 30 different integrations. So the more complex, the harder the integrations are, the more engagement of the fusion teams we're definitely going to need here. And please pay attention. This is the only place where the fusion team actually shows up. Finally, we have the fusion team. And just as a reminder, the fusion team consists of the no-coders and software developers. And just as a reminder, the best practice that we recommend is the ratio of 3:1 or 4:1, 3 for no-coders to 1 software developer, okay? So that's where the fusion team finally pops up. Burley.
So, again, on the sort of simple scenarios where you may have, very few or no custom components, perhaps you're reusing existing integrations that have already been built, or you're integrating with an application that has a very well-defined RESTful API. As you go through the checklist, this will help you identify if the business team is capable and confident enough to be able to deliver this themselves. As it starts getting a little bit more complex, right, and an aggregate when it gets over to the medium, as Katherine said, oftentimes this is around integrations, right? That is probably the number one most common area where you start running out of steam, where it's a new API or a new integration. Perhaps the COE has had experience with it before. There may be reusable interfaces, there may be reusable components. The reuse plays a big role here because it may be a heavy technical complexity if you had to build it all from scratch, but hopefully you can reuse components that have already been built somewhere inside the COE or inside the enterprise. That means that you don't have to go through that yourself, right? So as you move to the right, the COE would typically have a persona or role of a business architect, right? That would step in and start to provide sort of business architecture standards. This is also where suggestions and recommendations around component use, I think, are really important. And then where there's cases where there's high complexity, right, because of either the volume custom development that's required, could be the high number of transactions that require very specialized architectural skills. That's when you would need to engage a true sort of enterprise architect, or true sort of architect that probably is not inside the COE. It may, but it may live someplace else inside the organization. And so pulling those resources in as needed into the Fusion team then becomes essential.
Wonderful. So we will pause here because I'm pretty confident that you have a ton of questions or maybe comments or maybe objections. Maybe this is not how it works in your organization. That's maybe for our partners who are in the room today, this is not how you see this distinction between COE, Fusion teams, and business delivery. But like these three segments, business delivery, COE, and Fusion teams, you're going to see them across the whole playbook. Like that's the foundation of the playbook. So ladies and gentlemen, any questions, comments, or objections? Please. Then let's move on. So please.
For example, we have to develop multiple platforms for mobile, for web, for Windows, and also we have to develop for what can I say, different kind of equipments for kiosks, for etc.
Yeah. That's a brilliant question. Thank you very much for that. So your question actually relates to UI, UX complexity, to this one. So if we're talking about, it depends on the no-code tools that you use. In some cases, the no-code tools, like in the case of Creatio, they will take into account you want this functionality for the mobile app and for the desktop. In some cases, you need to develop separately for the mobile and for the desktop and for the different resolutions. So it really depends on the platform of the no-code platform that you're going to be using. But you are absolutely right. This is actually one of the parameters you need to take into the consideration when you make the decision. So who's going to build your workflows on the platform? Is it the business delivery? Is it the COE? Or you need the Fusion team?
Oftentimes the COE has a UX specialist, right, that will provide sort of the help and support to help navigate through some of those decisions.
And when we say UI, UX, that's a very kind of generic term, how we try to determine exactly what you asked. Which devices, Thank you. Any other questions? Please, Stefan.
In our project, we have a phase where we spend time to regarding the data model conception. And usually it's key to avoid any issue at the end.
Yep.
Where is this?
Yep. That's, you're asking about the stage when we actually design and prototype. So that would be stage number 3, because the data model is something that we need to define in the most beginning at the design stage prior to go into the exact MVP. So we need to see the full data model before we go to the exact MVP. That is why, to answer your question, these are our stage number 3, which is design and prototyping. Sounds good? Wonderful. Please.
Just an observation, Catherine. Our design methodology, we would apply joint KPIs, milestones, and a success criteria between stage 2 and 3. Do you see that as common in other projects as well?
100%. And when we say project assignment, stage number 4, that's exactly when we talk about the success criteria, the KPI, 100%. That's must-have step. And thank you very much for adding this. We forgot to mention that that's an important step at the project assignment stage. Thank you.
So to ask, like, when you guys started to work on this, like, what's the target audience, who do this? Why I'm asking is, I'm right now working in the sales, I have an experience from Accenture that to use Oracle, and I love it because this will help us, to sell big time, right? But at the same time, just like I think people out when I will put this in front, for example, a developer, like, who's the audience from your perspective?
Yeah, I love the questions. Thank you for that question. So the reader of this book is going to be the role that is responsible and that wants to take the ownership for the no-code implementation in the company. Can it be the representative of the business function? Absolutely yes, because you can do a ton of things just with the business delivery. Can it be the representative of the IT function? Absolutely yes, and we have, again, many IT leaders who are evangelists and huge fans and understand the value of no-code. But at the same time, as in the example of Bayshore, if you participated in the keynote, Bayshore, they create their own COE, Center of Excellence. And you know what? We see more and more organizations that make the decision to create their own Center of Excellence. And I can tell you, at Creatio, we have our own Center of Excellence. So, like, to support this whole idea of Creatio runs on Creatio, we created our own Center of Excellence that operates separately from our IT folks, separately from the business folks. This is the Center of Excellence that is responsible for the whole automation of the Creatio workflows and processes.
Oracle tried the same and they failed big time.
Sorry about that. Come to Creatio. It works at Creatio. Okay, great question. Thank you very much.
Catherine, the thing I would add on to
Please
this
do.
is, I mean, Catherine talked about who the audience is intended for. I would add who it's not for. just to be clear here, right? This is not something that you would intend for a pro dev, right? It sounds obvious, but this is very much through the lens of what through the experiences that we've gained, what we think is right for a no-code project, right? And we tried hard. I mean, the first question we asked was, do you even need a playbook like this? Aren't things like DevOps or Agile? I mean, there's been software developer guidance in the industry for many decades. Why do something new, right? So that was sort of the first question. And we realized that most, if not the majority of the sort of software guidance and methodologies, things like DevOps, were very much targeted at a developer and technical audience, right? Even the name DevOps, you're either a developer or you're an ops, but there's no notion of the business and the business playing a direct role in that process. And so the whole point of this was to try to tailor something that actually reimagined the process for no code. This is not meant to be a replacement to Agile or a replacement to other software methodologies if you're a pro dev, and honestly, a pro dev reading this would probably reject it because it may not fit what they do. But for the no-code developer, for no-code projects, this is meant to be that practical, roll up your sleeves, hands-on guidance that helps ensure that they are taking fullest advantage of the no-code platform, right? That they're not simply sort of slapping traditional DevOps practices onto what they're doing, but they're really thinking about the steps that take full advantage of the speed and the agility that you can achieve with no-code. Does that make sense? It is got a very specific point of view, and so the question you asked was a really good one, which is who is the intended audience? Because that's so important. If you just handed it to a developer, they would probably not read it. Right.
Thank you. Thank you for that
That's
comment.
great feedback.
And okay, let's move on. That's actually this Lewis Carroll quote for the design stage. We're gonna switch to the go live stage, and while we are doing that, because we already went through the stage 4 project assignment, so here comes go live. And again, I repeat it again and again. The speed with which we go matters. It does matter. The faster we deliver, let me give you this example. At the keynote presentation, I gave the example of Andy, who was putting together this territory management new idea that came to his mind, right? So imagine this old world where his idea, it might have been taking, I don't know, 6 months even to automate this idea, because there are a ton of different complex processes that he wanted to automate through territory management. But he got his first MVP within 2 weeks, like 2 weeks, go live. That's a huge one. Before we move to the details of prototype to MVP, I want to elaborate on something what Burley mentioned. He started to name development methodologies, and there is actually the methodology that we highly recommend to use at the no-code development as well, especially at the prototype to MVP stage, especially to what Megan said about prioritization and putting together the backlog of features that needs to be developed. So the question to you, which and we need 3 stickers here, okay? So which development methodology, ladies and gentlemen, do you believe could apply really, really well at this stage of prototype to MVP transition? Agile, and which part of the Agile? Is it Scrum? Or is it? Or is it not Scrum, and what would it be? Thank you very much. We need 3 stickers here. So why we believe Kanban is much better for prototype to MVP? Because the difference in Scrum is that you usually operate within 2-week sprints. So it's not going to work for the everyday delivery. While with Kanban, you have this list of tasks. You build those, you build the functions, you fill the features, and you go live immediately. So prototype to MVP stage. Let's go, Burley.
Okay. Yeah, so there you go. Kanban was the first point on the list. For those who aren't familiar with it, I mean, it was popularized by Toyota and Japanese manufacturing, and it really is prescriptive only about how you track work through a board, right? Everyone's probably heard of or you've seen a Kanban board of something that's in development or it's waiting for development. And so it's really good at helping to organize work, but it doesn't get prescriptive around timelines. It doesn't get prescriptives around roles, like you don't have to have a Scrum Master. And so the nice thing about Kanban is that you can usually layer it into your existing team or your existing structures more easily. I mean, how many people here, have your orgs gone through an agile transformation that took years, right? Just because of the training and the change to process and tools and the methodology. In agile, I'm not being negative about agile at all, but I'm saying it is hard to pick up at the speed that we need to operate for most no-code teams. And so we think Kanban is a much more sort of accessible and approachable technique, right, that can overlay. The other thing that Kanban does, which is important, is it promotes transparency. So all the work is broken down into small chunks of work, and you have full visibility over what's being worked, what's about to be worked, and so that is important as it relates to communicating back with the business, with your business stakeholder. At any given time, they know exactly where things are. They can help you change priorities of things that haven't started yet, but it gives you a common sort of language of how to communicate back and forth that demystifies it. Right? Whereas, again, a lot of traditional sort of heavy, agile ceremonies can sometimes make it harder, in practice to sort of really let the business understand what's going on. Whereas I think a Kanban board and some simple techniques can be sometimes easier from a communication standpoint.
Wonderful.
So as this stage is being completed, the other important thing here is you didn't start from scratch, and I made this point earlier, right? You've already inherited everything that you had done during the prototyping and the design phase. Now, again, it was happy path, it was broad, so there's certainly refactoring and there's certainly work that you will do now as you've scoped down to MVP, but again, you're doing it on top of something that already exists, so it's more of an evolution, not a complete, I've got a blank slate and I've got to start writing code from the bottom up. Which means that it can grow a little bit every day. And so that's important, and we'll talk to it in the next stage, but you can get feedback on much shorter intervals because you're adding features or micro use cases incrementally, and you can test them. You don't have to wait 2 weeks for the completion of the sprint or a month or two to the final testing of an MVP.
But
right?
here, our job is to release the minimum viable product. So that's our job at stage number 2. And let me ask you this question. Oren mentioned stakeholders and how important the stakeholders are in the whole process. So question to you, from all your experience, what do you think? When we talk MVP and we talk go live as soon as possible, stage number 6, feedback loop, who should provide this feedback? Is it a stakeholder or is it end users? Like, who are the people that we would expect to give us the feedback here?
Well, I think what we usually do is we let the client gather their feedback internally to that person that we consider the stakeholder, the person that we have.
I love it. So the answer is stakeholder. Absolutely. And this is our recommendation. So first of all, thank you very much. Secondly, that's exactly what we recommend in our book. At this stage, and again, remember, go quickly, go fast. Like that should be a drum beat. Go fast, go fast. So at this stage, we need feedback only from the stakeholder. We will get, don't understand me wrong, we will get feedback from the end users, but further in the process, during the everyday delivery, in the beginning, it's just the stakeholder who we want to talk to, period. Just the stakeholder. Burley.
Katherine, I realize there's one very important question on stage 5 that I wanted to ask, if you don't mind. And this may be a controversial one, but what types of testing do you perform during the build phase? Just shout out, what are the range of tests that you would typically perform? Build unit test? MVP, yeah, we're focused on MVP now. Any other?
Operational readiness. How far off is it from what they need to take it to the next step?
Any other experience? What's that? Yeah. So there's a full range of testing, right? And again, this is a point of view which you have to sort of again think about whether your experience or your projects fit this or not. But I would argue, I'll start with unit testing, for example. I would argue that in the case of a no-code platform project, unit testing in the traditional sense does not exist, right? Because you're not actually writing or constructing units. You're composing things from pre-built components. Now, you may still be testing business validation, there may be rules, but you're not testing whether the developer wrote the code for the widget correctly or whether it's going to fail, right? So it's important to think about, the kinds of testing that are needed still, right? And I would say just in general, I think there's more emphasis on sort of integration testing, right? Because that's really where more of the potential defects can emerge, right? The individual controls, you have to trust that the vendor has tested the controls that they built and released, but it's how you integrate them into end-to-end flows or integration scenarios, and then also layering in some of the business rules of validation. Those tend to be where, in practice, I think more of the testing can focus and should focus.
Yeah. And,
Like SQA, like for example, we integrate with banking, financial, and so we have multiple API integrations. Would that be at this point or at this stage where we actually engage the SQA team and have them verify like the API integration?
Yeah, back-end, so back-end integration, we talked about how that's one of the things that may, as you increase more complexity, you may involve either the COE or you may involve a fusion team. I think the answer depends in some ways as to whether or not this is a pre-existing interface, versus one that you're building for the first time. If it's pre-existing, you hope, or I would expect that the COE has previously tested that interface technically and has sort of wrapped a lot of that into an existing component that now makes it easier to consume, right? So the answer is yes, if it's the first time. You probably had to have someone on the COE or even a fusion team who did a lot of sort of traditional API backend testing, but then the reuse and composability of that hopefully does not need the same level of testing in the future.
Burley, and I have a logistic problem here because we only have 5 minutes left, unless our wonderful group wants to spend lunch with us. That I don't believe is the case, okay? So we need to really speed up. But the good news is that we will have separate sessions for each stage, and please join those sessions. Now let's move to the governance checks. And let me ask you this question at the governance stage. Who is responsible that all the governance checks have been performed? Whose responsibility in the organization it is? The project manager? Quality assurance, yes. So I agree with you. In a case, there is a large organization, and we're talking about a separate compliance department and quality assurance department. That's exactly who needs to take care of it. In the smaller organizations, they usually don't have it. And project manager and center of excellence actually is the entity that has to be responsible for the governance checks. And otherwise, things can go a little bit sideways. So a part of the book is about our responsibilities, which processes and regulations need to be set up in the beginning of utilizing no-code technology. Because when we give all this power to the users, when the users can actually build their own software, there are some risks involved into that, right? So we need to be very, very careful if we don't want, for example, some data exposure issues or something like that, okay? So governance checks. Burley, would you like to elaborate?
No, yeah, I think you've hit on that. The answer is, it will vary depending on the size and complexity. That's where the app matrix also helps in terms of identifying, who should be involved. Conflict resolution, maybe I'll just touch on briefly. There's also sort of internal collisions or conflicts across different groups that might be using the same process or using same components, and so there's also a role to play. It may not be imposed by any external, regulation or an audit committee, but there's still sort of potential conflicts that you need to look at from a governance and ownership perspective.
Right. And first release. Let me ask you this question. So if you had, from what you heard right now and from all your experience and from the questions you're asking and from the comments you're given, I understand that people in this room have a ton of experience. So from all your experience, let me ask you that. What do you believe is one most important rule for go live stage? If we need to define one key principle for go live, what would it be? Any ideas?
Business
Please, Bill.
I would say whatever you have has to work.
Whatever you have
Must work.
must work. Okay, that's a good phrase. At least we need this system to work. I agree. I'm with you, Bill. Thank you for that. Any other ideas?
I would say business adoption, right? Because it's not unless the users are familiar with the system, then it can work pretty fine. But like who use it, right? From day one.
User engagement. Yes, user adoption. Thank you very much for this one. Anything else, Oren?
The expectation of the customer. Know that this is not all your dreams, this is the MVP.
Thank you for that. And actually, that's the point I also wanted to mention. Thank you, Oren. So the most important principle here is make it the really minimum viable product. Like put the least functions and features into this first release. Please, in order to start communicating with your users, in order to start getting this engagement and adoption and user feedback. But as soon as you make this endless backlog, and as soon as you start saying, okay, without this feature, we can't go live. Without that feature, we can't go live. It will never end, period. It will just never, ever end. So our core job here at this stage is to say, this is the MVP, and we're not going further. We want to go live as soon as we potentially can. Okay?
Yep.
Good? Good. So our final stage, everyday delivery, and we have just a few minutes left for this stage, but then we have tomorrow the whole session about everyday delivery. Burley.
Yeah, so in the discussion we just had, if you go to the next slide, Catherine,
Yep.
I think sets the stage, what makes it possible to really manage, hopefully down the scope of that first release is the fact that you're going to be very rapid in terms of, adding additional features. This isn't I have to wait months, in order to get the next release. This is a very quick iteration based on their feedback. So, 9 collects the feedback, 10 gives you, the ability to then rapidly layer in those features, those usability improvements, to turn them around very quickly. It is important to do it, though, in a structured and intentional manner. There's often the squeaky wheel gets the grease type of phenomenon. So the feedback you collect, you still have to prioritize through your stakeholder, make sure it gets applied to the same criteria that you would apply to whether this really should be implemented or not.
So very, very quick, but I have to ask this question. I know that we're late, but I have to ask it. So when we say feedback loop, what type of feedback do we expect? Where should we get this feedback? From where? End users, thank you very much. Who else? A stakeholder, yeah, he's been with us during the previous stages. He stays with us now. Stakeholder is here. Absolutely. What else? Decision makers, brilliant. Else, I need something more. Where else can we get a very, very valuable feedback about actually what are the features that are being used? Thank you very much. Yes, simultaneously. This system, yes, this system feedback. We should gather feedback from the application itself. System feedback, we can look at all the metrics and clearly understand how well we're doing. Okay? Amazing. Incremental improvements.
The incremental improvements we've talked about, it really is an extension of the stage 5. You can continue to use Kanban here, right, because you're getting hopefully small, actionable feedback items that you can then work and release as they are ready to be released. That sets the stage to in stage 11 to push them out, right? The idea is to have a continuous delivery type of model, not to have to wait for the next quarter, but as you address each item as it moves through the Kanban board, then you can push those in an automated way out to your users and see a steady stream of value to the users, which is important, but also, I mentioned this earlier, it reduces the change management and learning curve, right? Because you're not making big changes that require a lot of user training. You're doing a lot of small changes that can can be more easily picked up and adopted.
May I ask you a question? Who else in this room experienced the same challenge that I guess Megan mentioned, and my challenge has always been the same, prioritization, to define the backlog and to prioritize and say, okay, this one will go first and this one, excuse me, will go last. Who has challenges with this one? Everyone, okay, at least I'm not alone, okay. We always have, like with all our clients, but we always brainstorm and discuss, okay, so how to define this backlog. The beauty of no-code is that it actually can go very fast, and we can actually implement the backlog really, really fast with everyday delivery. Because you don't need to wait for the whole, I don't know, month or 2 months or 3 months until the next delivery. Right, Burley?
Correct, yeah. And it's partly the benefits of automation, right? Because you're not having to manually stage things. The platform itself is pushing things out in a small stream. The other thing about it is that it will reduce sort of, in a lot of ways, the arguing over this has to go first or that one, again, because it's not a long delay. They don't have to fight over who's making it this quarter. It might only be, oh, I have to, be in tomorrow's delivery, not today's delivery. So I think it helps change the dynamics and the dialogue.
And finally, the audit. Let me ask you this question. Final, I promise, and sorry about that. What are the biggest enemies in the software world? The biggest enemies?
Users.
Okay, that's a good start. That's a very positive start.
If we didn't have users, we wouldn't have any problems.
I have a colleague of mine who said once at a coffee, he said once, Katherine, life would be wonderful if no people around me. So that's about the users. Just kidding. So the biggest enemies of any software piece, I will give you a tip here, that has been developing for years. If you have a software piece that has been developing and it's already, let's say, like in the case of VideoQuinol, 3 years of development and extensions and improvements. So what would be our enemy here? What? So think about how many things have changed since the first feature that you developed in the product, like 3 years ago. How do you think? Would it be relevant today? So the biggest enemy would be those redundant and irrelevant features that we have in the product, and we still need to support them, right? Because they can actually break our software. So it's better to get rid of it, and this is exactly what we're going to do at the application audit. We're going to remind everyone that, ladies and gentlemen, after 3 years of the platform development, probably it's time now to look critically at all the functionality you have in the system and think twice if you really need this feature, or maybe it's easier for you to get rid of it.
You may not even need the application any longer, right? Every application has some lifespan, right? And one of the hardest things is actually to realize it's reached end of life and it should be replaced with something different, right? But we tend to hang on to things beyond when they should be.
I will say, working with Creatio and being able to turn things around so quickly makes that so much easier to accept. If you submit so much time into something 3 years into a certain app, people are a little bit more hesitant to move on.
Right.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yes, we can see that.
The other point that we've talked to a number of times is the whole idea of reuse and composability. I think another reason for the audit is maybe more of the carrot than the stick. It's not about finding things that you want to turn off, but things that you want to reuse, right? And so identifying those things that are actually common and that could be harvested or reused from a particular app or a particular process more broadly. I think that's something that people overlook. And a lot of times when you have just a single team, a single business team, their blinders are on. They're only looking at their own needs. This is where the COE plays a really important role, because they have the visibility and they hopefully have a business architect that has responsibilities for promoting reuse and encouraging adoption across the enterprise.
Brilliant. So just to summarize, first, I want to apologize for using your lunchtime, but it's been such a great pleasure collaborating with you and discussing this methodology that we're just going to be releasing and getting your feedback. So first of all, thank you very much for all your feedback today. And secondly, here are the sessions. One is going to happen today at 2:30, where we're going to make a deep dive into all the stages. We will go even deeper than we did right now into the design, go live, delivery, and then at the end, application matrix. Sounds good? Thank you very much again.